One of the greatest misunderstandings in life is how to deal with people who think they are more important than they really are. We live in a world where pride and self-importance dominate. People build their own thrones and expect you to bow. They demand attention, crave control, and manipulate others for their own benefit. But the question is, how did Jesus handle such people? Jesus walked among Pharisees, religious leaders, and rulers who thought they were the center of the universe. They paraded their titles, demanded honor, and despised correction. Yet, in all his wisdom, Jesus never fought for approval. He never wasted time proving himself to people who were too blind to see the truth. Instead, he did something powerful. He exposed their hearts without losing his own. Pride is the foundation of deception and makes a person believe they are always right, that they cannot be corrected, that their opinion is law. This is why the Pharisees, the religious elite, were the ones who had the hardest time accepting Jesus. They were not searching for truth. They were protecting their power. They were not looking for wisdom. They were looking for control. And Jesus understood this. He knew that arguing with a prideful person is like pouring water into a broken jar. No matter how much you give, nothing is retained. So he never argued with them. He never wasted his words on those who had already decided not to listen. When the Pharisees confronted him, they did not come with open hearts. They came to trap him, to test him, to twist his words. They demanded to know where his authority came from, and Jesus, in his wisdom, responded with a question of his own. He asked, was John's baptism from heaven or from men? They were caught. If they said it was from heaven, they would have to admit that they rejected God's message. If they said it was from men, the people would turn against them. So they answered, we don't know. And Jesus, knowing their hearts, simply said, then neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Did you see that? He did not argue. He did not plead. He did not fight for their approval. He simply exposed their own lack of wisdom and moved on. This is the power of understanding who you are. You don't have to waste time proving yourself to people who are not truly looking for answers. When the Pharisees asked whether it was lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, they were not looking for the truth. They were looking for a way to trap him. If he said yes, the people would turn against him. If he said no, the Roman authorities would accuse him. But Jesus, in his wisdom, simply asked for a coin and said, whose image is on this? They answered, Caesar's. And he responded, then give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Again, he did not argue. He did not get drawn into their games. He simply spoke wisdom and let them walk away in silence. Why? Because pride cannot receive truth. A prideful heart is like a closed door. No matter how much you knock, it will not open unless the person inside chooses to unlock it. And so Jesus modeled a lesson that many still struggle to learn today. You do not argue with pride. You do not fight for validation. You do not waste energy debating with people who have no intention of listening. Instead, you speak truth. You walk in wisdom and you let the results prove who you are. Even at his trial, when he stood before Pilate, falsely accused and condemned by men who twisted his words, Jesus did not argue. Pilate was astonished and asked, do you not hear all these charges against you? But Jesus remained silent. He understood that some battles are not won with words, but with character. Some people will only believe after they see the results. So instead of defending himself, he fulfilled his purpose. Instead of proving himself, he let time reveal the truth. And this is where many people fail. They feel the need to argue, to prove, to fight for recognition. They believe that if they do not respond, they will lose. But Jesus showed us the opposite. Sometimes the greatest power is found in silence. Sometimes the best response is wisdom. And sometimes the only way to handle a prideful person is to let them expose themselves. So today, if you find yourself surrounded by people who challenge your every move, who twist your words, who demand explanations but refuse to listen, remember this: Jesus never argued with pride. He spoke truth, he walked in wisdom, and he let time reveal what words could not. And the truth always wins. There is a difference between reacting and responding. When people attack, criticize, or challenge you, the natural instinct is to defend yourself, to prove them wrong, to fight back with emotion. But emotion is not wisdom. Feelings are not strategy. And Jesus never allowed his emotions to dictate his response. Instead, he operated with wisdom. Every word measured, every response calculated, every silence intentional. When the Pharisees and religious leaders came to him, they were not coming for understanding. They came with hidden agendas, with hearts full of pride, seeking to trap him in his own words. They wanted to manipulate his responses, twist his statements, and use them as weapons against him. But Jesus never reacted out of anger, frustration, or pride. He never allowed their hostility to pull him into an argument. He responded with wisdom, not emotion. One day they brought a woman caught in adultery and threw her at his feet. They quoted the law demanding that she be stoned. But they weren't looking for justice. They were looking for power. They wanted to see if Jesus would contradict the law or show mercy in a way they could accuse him. It was a trap, a moment designed to provoke a reaction. But Jesus did something unexpected. He didn't answer them immediately. He didn't argue. He didn't react. Instead, he stooped down and wrote in the sand. Can you imagine that? Instead of being pressured into an emotional response, he took control of the moment. He shifted the focus from their accusations to his wisdom. And then, when he finally spoke, his words cut through their hypocrisy like a sword. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Who? One by one, they walked away. Why? Because wisdom dismantles manipulation. Emotion reacts, but wisdom redirects. If Jesus had responded with anger or defensiveness, he would have been playing their game. But wisdom does not play by the enemy's rules. It creates its own. When people tried to challenge his authority, he never panicked. When they demanded signs and miracles to prove himself, he never performed to please them. When he was falsely accused, he never begged for justice. He responded with wisdom, not emotion. Even in the face of betrayal, Jesus remained composed. When Judas sat at the table, knowing he was about to betray him, Jesus did not expose him in front of the disciples. He simply said, what you're about to do, do quickly. No anger, no frustration, no emotional outbursts. Why? Because wisdom sees beyond the moment. Wisdom understands that some battles are not worth fighting because the outcome is already determined. When Peter, full of passion, took a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest's servant, Jesus corrected him immediately. He told him to put the sword away and healed the man. Why? Because Peter reacted with emotion, but Jesus responded with wisdom. He knew that the battle was not against flesh and blood. He knew that victory was not found in retaliation, but in fulfilling his purpose. And this is where so many people fail. They allow their emotions to control their words. They react instead of responding. They fight battles that wisdom would have told them to walk away from. But Jesus showed us a different way. He showed us that when people try to provoke you, you don't react. You respond with wisdom. When people try to manipulate you, you don't engage. You rise above it. When people try to trap you with their words, you don't defend yourself. You let the truth speak for itself. This is why when Pilate questioned him, demanding answers, Jesus remained silent. Pilate was confused. He asked, "Do you not hear all these charges against you?" But Jesus did not argue. He understood that no matter what he said, The decision had already been made. His purpose was greater than proving his innocence. His mission was bigger than winning an argument, and that is the lesson. Wisdom does not waste words. It wins with strategy. Jesus never reacted out of emotion. He never fought for approval. He never argued with those who had already made up their minds. Instead, he walked in wisdom, he spoke with authority, and he let time prove what words could not. So today, if you are facing criticism, if people are challenging you, if others are twisting your words and trying to provoke you, remember this: you don't react, you respond. You don't fight battles that wisdom tells you to avoid. You don't waste words on those who refuse to listen. You don't let emotions dictate your decisions. Instead, you do what Jesus did. You speak when necessary, stay silent when wise, and let the truth defend itself. Because in the end, wisdom always wins. People who thrive on control and manipulation do not seek truth, they seek power. They twist conversations, distort reality, and use emotions as tools to keep others under their influence. They pressure, they guilt trip, they demand explanations, but their goal is never understanding, it's dominance. And Jesus understood this. He knew that not everyone who asked a question wanted an answer. Not everyone who confronted him sought truth. Some were only looking for a way to trap him, to discredit him, to manipulate him into saying or doing something they could use against him, but he never fell into their traps. He exposed their manipulation without losing his own peace. When the religious leaders came to Jesus, they often disguised their intentions. They approached him with fake respect, calling him teacher, pretending to seek wisdom, but their hearts were filled with deception. One day they asked him, "Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar?" It seemed like an innocent question, but it was a trap. If he said yes, the people would see him as a traitor to their nation. If he said no, the Roman authorities would accuse him of rebellion. But Jesus did not get flustered. He did not react in frustration. He did not allow their manipulation to disturb his peace. Instead, he asked for a coin and simply said, "Whose image is on this?" They answered, "Caesar's." And he replied, "Then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." They had no answer. They had no way to trap him. Why? Because wisdom cannot be manipulated. Jesus did not argue. He did not try to explain himself. He did not defend his integrity. He simply spoke truth, and truth dismantled their deception. Another time, they tried to use compassion against him. They brought a woman caught in adultery, threw her at his feet, and demanded that he give a verdict. They did not care about justice. They did not care about righteousness. They only wanted to manipulate him into a response they could use against him. If he condemned her, they would accuse him of being harsh and unforgiving. If he released her, they would claim he disrespected the law of Moses. There's another trap. But Jesus did not react to their urgency. He did not let their pressure dictate his response. Instead, he stooped down and wrote in the sand, "Silence." The longer he waited, the more the weight of their own guilt pressed upon them. Then he stood and said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." The manipulation was broken. Their own hypocrisy was exposed. One by one, they left. Jesus had won, not by arguing, not by proving himself, not by explaining his intentions, but by standing firm in wisdom and refusing to be controlled by their tactics. Even in his final hours, Jesus faced manipulation. Judas, who had walked with him, sat at the table, pretending to be loyal while secretly planning to betray him. Jesus knew what was in his heart. He knew what was about to happen, but he did not beg Judas to stay. He did not try to stop him. He simply said, "What you are about to do, do quickly." That is the power of wisdom. It does not panic. It does not fight for control. It does not react in desperation. It simply sees through deception and refuses to be shaken. When Jesus stood before Pilate, accused by false witnesses, he did not argue. Pilate was amazed and asked, "Do you not hear all these charges against you?" But Jesus remained silent, because sometimes the greatest response to manipulation is no response at all. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to play the game. And this is the lesson. You do not have to defend yourself against those who are not seeking truth. You do not have to fight for understanding with those who refuse to see. You do not have to explain yourself to those who have already decided against you. Instead, like Jesus, you stand in wisdom, speak only when necessary, and let the truth expose the lies. So if people are twisting your words, pressuring you for a reaction, trying to manipulate your emotions, do not lose your peace. Do not let their urgency become your urgency. Do not fight battles that wisdom has already won. Instead, remain steady, respond with discernment, and let the truth do the work. Because in the end, deception cannot stand in the presence of wisdom, and the truth always wins. In a world where people believe the loudest voice wins, Jesus showed us a different way. He never needed to raise his voice to prove his authority. He never had to argue his way into power. He never fought for validation. Instead, he demonstrated that truth does not need to shout. It only needs to be revealed. When Jesus walked among the religious leaders, they constantly challenged him, trying to force him into debates, trying to catch him in contradictions, trying to make him prove himself. But he never played their game. He never engaged in meaningless arguments. Instead, he spoke in parables, using wisdom to separate those who truly sought truth from those who were only looking for control. One day, the chief priests and elders came to him, demanding, "By what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority?" They were not asking because they wanted to understand. They were asking because they wanted to trap him. They wanted him to say something they could use against him. But Jesus didn't argue. He didn't engage in a power struggle. He simply responded with a question. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? Immediately they were caught. If they said it was from heaven, they would have to admit they had rejected God's messenger. If they said it was from men, they feared the people because everyone knew John was a prophet. So they answered, "We don't know." And Jesus said, "Then neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." Did you see that? He never had to shout. He never had to argue. He never had to prove himself. He simply revealed the truth, and the truth did the rest. When people tried to use their voices to overpower him, he used wisdom to silence them. When the Sadducees came to him, trying to challenge his teaching on the resurrection, they thought they had the perfect argument. They brought a hypothetical situation about a woman who had married 7 brothers, asking, "At the resurrection, whose wife will she be?" They were confident in their reasoning. They thought they had exposed a flaw in his teaching. But Jesus did not argue. He simply revealed the truth. You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. He explained the reality of resurrection life, and by the time he finished speaking, they were silenced. Jesus never had to fight to be heard. He never had to convince people who had already made up their minds. He never wasted words on those who refused to listen. Instead, he let the truth do its work. One of the most powerful moments of this was when Jesus stood before Pilate. The Roman governor had the power to release him or sentence him to death. Pilate questioned him, asking, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "You have said so." Pilate continued questioning, but Jesus remained silent. He did not beg for his life. He did not try to convince Pilate of his innocence. He did not argue against the false accusations. And Pilate was amazed. He had seen countless men stand before him, pleading, arguing, defending themselves. But Jesus was different. His silence carried more authority than the words of his accusers. And that is the lesson. Truth does not have to argue. Truth does not need to be loud. Truth does not need to fight for a platform. When something is true, it stands on its own. Jesus never fought for attention because truth naturally draws those who seek it. He never forced anyone to believe him because truth does not need force. It simply reveals itself. This is why he often said, "Whoever has ears, let them hear." Because truth is not for those who refuse to listen. It is for those who are willing to receive it. So if you find yourself in a situation where people are challenging you, questioning you, demanding that you prove yourself, remember this. Truth does not need to shout. You do not have to fight for validation. You do not have to argue with people who have already closed their hearts. You do not have to engage in every debate. Instead, speak with wisdom, respond with discernment, and let the truth do the work. Because in the end, truth will always be revealed, and the truth always wins. There is a difference between being silent and being strategic. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Silence is often the greatest demonstration of power. When Jesus faced his accusers, he knew that not every question deserved an answer. Not every accusation needed a response. Not every battle was worth fighting. There are moments when wisdom demands that you remain quiet because your words will not change the hearts of those who are already committed to misunderstanding you. When Jesus stood before the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders were desperate to find something, anything that they could use to condemn him. They brought in false witnesses, but their testimonies contradicted each other. They hurled accusations, but none of them could hold. And through it all, Jesus remained silent. Imagine that. A room full of powerful men shouting, accusing, questioning, and yet the one who held all authority did not say a word. Then the high priest, frustrated by his silence, demanded, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And in that moment, Jesus spoke only one sentence. With those two words, he confirmed his identity. He did not debate. He did not try to convince them. He did not explain himself. He simply stated the truth, and the truth was enough. When he stood before Pilate, the governor asked him, "Do you not hear the many things they testify against you?" Pilate was used to seeing men beg for their lives, argue in desperation, plead their case. But Jesus did none of that. The Bible says, but Jesus gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Why? Because Jesus understood something powerful. Some battles are won by silence. Some accusations are so false that they collapse under their own weight. Some attacks are so empty that responding only gives them credibility. Some people are so determined to twist your words that the wisest thing you can do is say nothing at all. Jesus never wasted words. He spoke with precision. When people came to him with genuine questions, he answered with wisdom. But when they came with deception, manipulation, and malice, he often chose silence. Because silence is a strategy. Silence forces the enemy to reveal himself. Silence exposes the motives of the accuser. Silence places the weight of proof back on those who make baseless claims. Even on the cross, as he was mocked by the soldiers, insulted by the thieves beside him, and ridiculed by the religious leaders, Jesus did not respond to their taunts. He did not use his final moments to defend himself. He did not waste his breath on proving who he was. Instead, the only words he spoke were words of forgiveness, words of purpose, words of surrender to the Father, because he understood that some voices are not worthy of a response. This is where so many people go wrong. They believe that every accusation must be answered, every false claim must be corrected, every insult must be met with a defense. But Jesus showed us a different way. He showed us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Because silence forces people to think. Silence shifts the pressure back onto the accuser. Silence frustrates those who expect a reaction. Silence makes those who lie reveal their own inconsistencies. And this is the lesson. Silence is not surrender. It is strategy. You do not have to answer every false accusation. You do not have to defend yourself against those who refuse to listen. You do not have to engage in battles that wisdom tells you to avoid. Instead, like Jesus, you discern when to speak and when to be silent. You recognize that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. So if people are challenging you, attacking you, twisting your words, trying to provoke you, do not fall into the trap of endless arguments. Do not waste your energy on those who are not seeking truth. Do not feel pressure to prove yourself to people who have already decided against you. Instead, follow the example of Jesus. Speak when necessary. But when wisdom calls for it, remain silent. Because in the end, truth defends itself. And the truth always wins. There is a powerful difference between defending yourself and letting the truth defend you. When people misunderstand you, when they misrepresent you, when they spread falsehoods about you, the natural reaction is to fight back, to explain, to correct every lie. But Jesus showed us a different way. He understood that the truth is not something you fight for. It is something you stand in. When the Pharisees and religious leaders plotted against Jesus, they did not come at him openly. They worked behind the scenes, whispering, spreading false narratives, twisting his words. They accused him of breaking the Sabbath. They accused him of being a blasphemer. They accused him of leading the people astray. And yet Jesus never ran after them, trying to fix their misunderstanding. He never gathered a crowd to defend his name. He never tried to silence his critics through arguments. He simply continued walking in truth, knowing that truth over time reveals itself. When the religious leaders accused him of casting out demons by the power of Satan, he did not react in anger. He did not try to prove them wrong by pleading for their approval. He simply stated a principle. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. With just a few words, he dismantled their false claims because that is the power of truth. It does not need force. It needs time. When Jesus stood on trial, he was falsely accused by men who had been bribed to lie. They twisted his teachings, took his words out of context, and presented him as a threat to the nation. But he did not argue. He did not try to convince them of his innocence. He did not fight to be understood because he knew something most people miss. When you live in truth, you do not have to chase after it. It will defend you in the right time. Even Pilate, after listening to all the accusations, could find no fault in him. And yet, Jesus did not beg for justice. He did not demand fairness. He stood in the truth, and the truth spoke for itself. This is where many people get trapped. They believe that every false claim must be confronted. They believe that if they do not explain themselves, people will believe the lies. But Jesus showed us that truth is revealed, not argued. When he walked the earth, people made their own judgments about him. Some called him a prophet, some called him a troublemaker, some called him a deceiver. But he never tried to control people's opinions. He never wasted time chasing approval. He simply lived in a way that made the truth undeniable. And that is the lesson. When you walk in integrity, when you live in truth, you do not have to fight for your reputation. The truth will defend itself. This is why Jesus never panicked when people opposed him. He knew that falsehood has an expiration date, but truth is eternal. When people attack your character, when they twist your words, when they misrepresent your intentions, do not live in fear. Do not become consumed with proving yourself. Do not waste your energy on trying to convince those who are determined to misunderstand you. Instead, continue walking in truth. Continue being who God has called you to be. Because the truth has a way of rising to the surface. The truth has a way of proving itself over time. The truth has a way of making the lies fall apart. So if you find yourself in a place where people are speaking against you, if you feel the pressure to defend yourself, if you are tempted to chase after validation, pause. Ask yourself, does God need me to prove what is true? Or does he simply need me to walk in it? Because in the end, lies are temporary, but the truth always wins. There is something powerful about remaining unmoved in the face of opposition. When people attack your character, question your motives, and try to pull you into endless debates, the natural tendency is to defend yourself, to react emotionally, to fight for your voice to be heard. But Jesus demonstrated a different approach. He understood that those who seek to manipulate are not looking for truth, they are looking for control. And the moment you engage on their terms, you give them power over you. When Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the religious elite, they did not come to him seeking wisdom. They came to test him, to trap him, to provoke him into a reaction they could use against him. But he never lost his composure. He never allowed their accusations to dictate his response. He never let their hostility pull him into emotional battles. Instead, he remained steady, unwavering, unshaken. One day, they came to him with a question designed to discredit him. They asked, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" They did not ask because they wanted to know. They asked because they wanted to find fault. If he emphasized one commandment over another, they could accuse him of disregarding the rest. If he refused to answer, they could say he was incompetent. But Jesus, calm and collected, simply responded, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." In one statement, he silenced their schemes. He did not argue. He did not get defensive. He did not retaliate. He simply stood firm in truth. Even when Jesus was betrayed, when Judas led the soldiers to arrest him, he did not resist. He did not panic. He did not lash out. Instead, he looked at Judas, the man who had walked with him, eaten with him, learned from him, and said, "Friend, do what you have come for." Imagine that. He called his betrayer friend. Because Jesus was never moved by the actions of others. He was anchored in his purpose. When Peter, out of zeal and anger, took a sword and struck the servant of the high priest, Jesus stopped him immediately. "Put your sword away," he said. "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Even in the face of betrayal, arrest, and injustice, he remained composed because he knew that when you stand in truth, you do not have to fight every battle. Some battles are won by standing firm. And this is what so many people miss. They believe that strength is in retaliation. They believe that proving themselves is the way to victory. But Jesus showed us that true power is not found in reacting. It is found in remaining unmoved. When he stood before Pilate, falsely accused, misrepresented, and sentenced to death for crimes he did not commit, he did not argue, he did not plead for fairness, he did not lose control. He stood firm, knowing that the truth would outlive every lie spoken against him. This is the lesson. When you know who you are, when you know the truth, when you are anchored in purpose, you do not have to react to every attack. You do not have to answer every critic. You do not have to engage with those who are committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, you stand. You remain steady. You refuse to be shaken. Because manipulation thrives on reaction. It feeds off emotional responses. It gains strength when you allow yourself to be provoked, but when you stand firm, when you refuse to be moved by the schemes of others, You strip manipulation of its power. So if people question your motives, if they challenge your integrity, if they try to provoke you into battles you do not need to fight, remain steady. Speak when necessary, but do not let their urgency dictate your actions. Do not let their hostility control your emotions. Do not let their accusations shake your confidence. Because in the end, those who stand firm will see the victory, and the truth always wins. There is something powerful about walking away. It is not weakness, it is not defeat, it is wisdom. Not every battle is meant to be fought. Not every argument deserves a response. Not every attack requires your energy. And Jesus understood this better than anyone. He knew when to stand and he knew when to walk away. Throughout his ministry, the religious leaders constantly tried to trap him. They followed him not to learn, but to find fault. They listened to his words not to understand, but to twist them. They questioned him not because they sought truth, but because they wanted to discredit him. And yet Jesus never allowed their hostility to distract him from his mission. One day, after teaching in the synagogue, the people became so enraged by his words that they drove him out of the city and brought him to the edge of a cliff, intending to throw him off. But the Bible says something remarkable. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. He did not argue. He did not plead. He did not try to convince them. He simply walked away. Why? Because his purpose was not to fight battles that did not serve his mission. His purpose was not to stay in places where people had already rejected the truth. His purpose was to fulfill his assignment, and anything that distracted from that was not worth his time. When the Pharisees and teachers of the law tried to provoke him, he never allowed himself to be pulled into their schemes. When they demanded a sign, he refused. When they accused him, he remained silent. When he saw their hearts were hardened, he did not force understanding. He simply moved on. There is great wisdom in knowing when to walk away. Some people are not looking for truth, they are looking for an argument. Some people do not want to understand, they only want to test you. Some places are not meant for you to stay, they are meant for you to pass through. Even in his final moments, when Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" Jesus did not respond. He knew that Pilate was not asking because he wanted an answer. He was asking because he was conflicted, because he was afraid, because he did not want to take responsibility. And so Jesus remained silent because he understood that not everyone is ready for the truth. And you cannot force understanding upon those who refuse to see. This is where many people struggle. They stay in places where they are no longer welcome. They argue with people who have no intention of listening. They waste energy trying to prove themselves to those who have already made up their minds. But Jesus showed us a different way. He showed us that walking away is not giving up, it is guarding your purpose. When he sent out his disciples, he gave them clear instructions. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that place and shake the dust off your feet. Did you catch that? Do not argue, do not beg, do not stay where you are not received. Simply leave and move on, because your purpose is too important to be wasted on people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Your calling is too valuable to be trapped in endless debates. Your time is too precious to fight battles that do not advance the kingdom. Jesus never stayed where he was not welcome. He never forced anyone to believe. He never wasted time trying to convince those who refused to see. Instead, he kept moving, kept teaching, kept fulfilling his assignment. So if you find yourself in a situation where people refuse to understand you, where your presence is no longer valued, where your words fall on deaf ears, do not stay out of pride. Do not argue out of frustration. Do not fight for a place where God has released you. Instead, follow the example of Jesus. Walk away with grace. Walk away with wisdom. Walk away knowing that the truth does not need to be forced. It only needs to be revealed. Because in the end, those who walk in wisdom will always reach their destination. And the truth always wins. The way Jesus handled those who opposed him was not with fear, not with desperation, and not with a need to prove himself, but with wisdom, confidence, and divine strategy. He knew when to speak and when to be silent. He knew when to stand firm and when to walk away. He never allowed manipulation to control him, and he never wasted time trying to convince those who were committed to misunderstanding him. Instead, he remained focused on his mission, anchored in truth and unmoved by the opinions of men. And that is the lesson for all of us. You do not have to fight every battle. You do not have to respond to every accusation. You do not have to waste energy trying to prove yourself to those who refuse to see. Instead, walk in wisdom. Stand firm in truth. Guard your peace. Choose your battles carefully. And most importantly, never let the noise of the world distract you from the purpose God has placed on your life. May you walk with confidence, knowing that truth always rises, wisdom always prevails, and God's purpose for your life will always stand. May you have the strength to be silent when necessary, the courage to stand firm when required, and the wisdom to walk away when it is time. Good luck on your journey. Stay strong in the truth, and may God guide your steps. Thank you, and God bless you.